I work in food service, front of house, so in the early days of the pandemic with restaurants closed, I was taking work wherever I could find it. An old friend clued me into a medical office that needed someone to come in and do a bit of light filing. I was able to go in at night to limit direct contact with people, so I jumped at the opportunity right away. Ironically, the medical office job had been the safest gig I'd been offered thus far, COVID-wise. I wanted to avoid the bus if I could, due to crowds, so decided to swing for a rideshare app. It's not all that expensive in my area, and I really didn't want a virus. I headed in at almost 3 a.m. because it was after the cleaning crew had left. I was kicking myself for being so cautious, though, because I was exhausted. I stumbled onto the block looking for my ride, and to my tired self's great relief, the car spotted me almost immediately and pulled up asking, "Uber?" while I cluelessly wandered up and down the street searching. The ride was taking a while, but I'd only just moved here last year, so wasn't familiar with all the surrounding areas and thought nothing of it. I was pretty alert at first, so I was trying to pass the time, playing games on my phone and stuff. But the car didn't have a compatible phone charger, and I wasn't sure the building would have one, so I wanted to save my battery to be able to call a ride back. I shut my phone down into airplane mode and eventually drifted off from a combination of tiredness and boredom. I don't often take rideshare, so being alone with a strange driver often put me a bit on edge. But this guy had a pretty boring car and a very standard look about him. He looked a little like my brother even. Young, clean-kept, listening to jazz, nothing that screamed, "You need to micromanage this trip." When we arrived, the driver tried to wake me up by calling me from the front, but I was in too deep of a sleep and couldn't fully distinguish it from my dream. Finally, he awkwardly jimmied my leg to wake me up and kept saying, "Ma'am, ma'am, we're here now." I was embarrassed that I'd been that out of it, so I just gave a hurried, "Thanks," and got out of the car and into the building. As I looked around, I began to realize nothing was what I had expected of an office park. I had seen a street view of the building when I first looked up the business, and it had appeared to be a strip mall plaza. The further I went, the more loudly alarm bells were ringing in my gut. The structure was semi-dilapidated and it was pitch black dark past the entryway. I expected some lights to be off in the nighttime, but not to the whole building. I skittered across the concrete foundation, comprising what was left of the lobby area. Told myself they must just be renovating, and followed signs for the stairs. After what felt like ages, but was likely just a few minutes, all I had passed was construction equipment, a couple locked doors, and some smashed windows. I was certain I was not going to find a medical office and figured maybe I had mixed up the address. I took out my phone to double check, but once I got it out of airplane mode, I could barely get a signal. I kept moving around in the building, pacing, looking for a stronger signal. I eventually confirmed in my text that I had written down the correct address just by scrolling back, which didn't require service. Since I had only been inside for a few minutes at most, I figured I should try and get in touch with the driver, because if I entered the correct address, then it was only fair he should continue my ride to the correct place and save me the added fees of calling a second trip, considering this was all his mix-up. The app was taking forever to load with my slow service, but before I could get to a cloud of reception, I heard a rustling sound in the lower level of the building. I was on the top floor, and the only stairwell I was aware of was the one I had taken up, so would force me into the middle of the building. There was no way to exit the situation without encountering whoever was downstairs. In an abandoned building in the latest hours of the night, I figured the chances were high that it was a tweaker, and I had no desire to try slipping past a tweaker, especially when it was late enough that they were probably on something so jumpy and on edge. I tried to get a text out to a group of friends with my address and a request to call 911 to help get me from the property, because I didn't feel safe walking in that neighborhood at night and didn't have enough reception to call a new ride. But the message wasn't sending. Reception was too weak. So I gave up on getting my phone going and started checking for another stairwell, or even window with balconies or dumpsters that could be used to exit the second floor as a last resort, in the event whoever was downstairs came upstairs. I scrambled over to the door with a stairs sign on it, but the stairs were completely dilapidated, and it was essentially just a straight down drop to the first floor. At that point, the worst case scenario began to unfold. I heard whoever was downstairs begin making their way up the stairs. I thought fast and figured, based on my walk about the floor, was basically a giant loop, so I would have to wait for whoever this was to come up the stairs, wait for them to come all the way up, and then sprint the opposite direction of wherever they were going and try to get down the stairs and out of the building in time to make it to the road without encountering them. I was not anticipating being chased or anything, but didn't want to piss off a druggie or have a homeless person who might be living there feel as though I'd trespassed and become hostile towards me, or have any sort of interaction that could possibly occur that hour in an abandoned industrial park. I held my breath for what felt like 5 minutes, but was likely closer to just 30 seconds, and the person appeared at the top of the stairs. To my great relief, it was just the Uber driver. I figured he had come back for me, realizing he had left me in the wrong spot, a place that could have worked out to be dangerous. So I came out from the beam I was hidden behind and started to wave him down. But then I processed. There was no way for him to realize this had been the wrong address. My stomach lurched forward and my blood chilled to slush. I made eye contact with him very briefly, and he was completely calm and composed, but breathing pretty heavily and blocking the stairwell down. On a normal, rational day as an outside observer, I could think of a dozen innocent reasons he might have returned, but in the moment, standing across from him, I just knew in my gut that this was someone with ill intent. I can't remember much more from the ensuing few minutes. Operating solely on muscle memory and instinct, I Superman dove for the second stairwell's opening and just let myself fall down the drop. Thankfully, I don't think he'd seen where I'd gone at first, though I was in too much pain to know it then. Plenty was bruised, but nothing was completely broken. I scrambled up and threw myself at anything that seemed like it could be the door. It was too dark to tell. I was disoriented from the fall, and I wasn't in a calm enough mindset to think to use my phone flashlight. Plus, in hindsight, some part of me probably knew it would call too much attention to my location. Just before I was able to reach the door, it flew open with a blinding light beaming straight into my eyes. My first thought, though not totally coherent, was, there's another one of these guys, and I stumbled backwards, trying to find something to hide behind. Before I could, a voice called out,
"All right, this is the police department. Everyone get on your knees with your hands in the air."
I didn't believe it was the police at first. I was in such a fight or flight mode and had already committed to flight that I continued looking for ways to get out. But he kept shining the flashlight right at me as I teetered around and yelled,
"Hey, I said on the ground, right now. Hands out. Hands out where I can see them."
He sounded so authoritative that I just automatically did exactly as he asked. He approached me and finally shined the light away from me. It took a second to get my night vision, but once I did, I could see he really was a police officer. I tried to explain what was happening, but first he started asking me all these questions, and that combined with what had just happened and my fear of the driver coming back all snowballed into me being unable to form a single articulate sentence. He was even asking easy questions too, like, "Can you tell me your name? Do you have any knives, needles, or anything that could poke or cut me? Would you rather talk in here or outside?" And my total babbling in response at first led him to believe I was on something. He directed me out to his car, and once I was safely out of the building, I was able to start getting my bearings just a little. I sat on the edge of the back seat of the squad car with the door open facing out, while he stood across from me and asked the same questions again. The first thing I could think to ask was, "Did my friends call you? What did they tell you?" And he explained, "No, nobody called him. He was patrolling the area and noticed a car idling outside of this building that's known to be condemned, and nobody's supposed to be inside." He was launching into a speech about how if I'd gone to shoot up or meet a John, he had resources he could direct me to, asked if I had somewhere safe to stay that night. But I was stuck on something else he'd said. Finally, it all clicked. The car. I spilled my whole rideshare story in a frantic word vomit. He looked around and the car wasn't there anymore. The officer guessed the guy had driven off while we were talking inside the building. He asked me all the details I remembered, and I told him, but there weren't many. I'd been too tired when the ride started to track much, but the officer realized I could pull up my Uber app and get all the information. There wasn't really enough reception there, even outdoors, so we sped down the road, and once I had enough bars, the app roared to life, and I had 4 missed notifications from the Uber. They said, "Hello, I've arrived," and "I don't see you. Can you confirm the pickup address is correct?" And "I'm flashing my hazards." And finally, "Unfortunately, your driver had to cancel." At first, I thought the driver was so cunning as to pick me up while sending these fake messages and canceling so the GPS wouldn't track us, knowing I wouldn't notice because I was asleep with my phone off and exonerating himself. But instead, I checked the car details, checked again, and it was definitely not the same driver. The person who'd driven me there had not been my Uber driver. My driver was somewhere else on the street when this guy pulled up to me. The policeman took my statement and said they would keep an eye out for the guy, but the best I could give them to go off of was basically young-looking Caucasian man with brown hair, sideburns, goatee, and 4-door sedan, wearing a zip-up sweatshirt. Maybe had a hood? Which is like 1 out of every 4 guys in this city. I feel so blessed to have survived this near miss. Suffice it to say, I do not take rideshare services anymore because you just never know. This happened about 6 months ago. I was leaving a work function at a bar around midnight in a large city, about an hour away from the suburban home I share with my partner. For reference, I'm a woman in my mid-20s with an average build, not tall, not strong, definitely not threatening in any way, and I had been a bit buzzed that night. I had like 3 drinks, so I wasn't incapacitated in the slightest. Anyway, I would ordinarily have taken a company car home, but I hadn't reserved one since I didn't know what time I'd be leaving, so I decided to Uber. The company reimbursed me for the bill anyway, so it made no difference to me. Once the Uber pulled up, I said goodbye to my colleagues and got in the back seat. I was always very nice to my Uber drivers, so I introduced myself. This driver, let's call him Ed, seemed totally normal. There were no red flags, and we made pleasant conversation for about 15 minutes until we were squarely out of the city on the way to the suburbs. From this pleasant conversation, I learned he lived in a certain neighborhood not far from my home. Note that this neighborhood, while relatively nearby, would have been completely out of the way on the route we were taking to my home. The conversation reached its natural end, so I just stayed a bit quiet and started looking at my phone. The quiet was interrupted by his voice, suggesting I take a nap if I felt tired. It didn't even strike me as weird at first, so I just thanked him for the offer, but I wasn't that tired. He then said, "Oh, I always get sleepy when I'm drunk. Are you sure?" At that point, something in my body made me even more wide awake than before. I replied that I wasn't drunk and, like I had said, I had just had a few drinks, so no need to nap. I'll be home soon enough anyway. He dropped it after that, but I still thought it was weird he'd say that. About 5 minutes later, he said that the highway had some weird construction going on, and that the single-lane traffic would make my trip way longer than it needed to be. He asked if it was okay to take another route. I agreed, already on edge and just wanted to be at home. My partner called at that moment, asking when I'd be home, and I made sure to make it very clear that I was talking to my significant other. Something was weird about this guy, and I wanted him to know that someone was expecting me at a specific time and knew where I was. After I hung up the phone, Ed stayed quiet and we got off the highway at a different exit than I'd ever used before. I guess that was to be expected since we were on a different route home. I was bullshitting on my phone because I didn't want to talk to this guy anymore, not even looking up until he said, "My house is only 5 minutes from here." Okay, I had a pit in my stomach. I was probably a good 25 minutes away from my house right now. I learned later the distance was artificially enlarged by his shortcut. I said some nonsense about how I liked the neighborhood and how my boyfriend and I were thinking of moving there instead. Basically anything I could think of to make it seem like I didn't think this was weird and I wasn't picking up any signals. Surprisingly, he didn't say anything in response, and now started driving on the road in a direction I knew led to my house. Phew, crisis averted, right? Except not really. 15 minutes to go, and my surroundings were more familiar. Just as I was starting to feel more at ease, he started asking questions about my boyfriend. What does he do? How long have you guys been together? And other seemingly normal questions. Finally, with about 10 minutes to go, he asked if my boyfriend made me happy. He did, very much. So I gushed a bit and said, "Yes, he makes me very happy." Then he asked if I made him happy. I thought that was weird, but humor was my defense mechanism, so I said, "Well, I should hope so." 8 minutes away. He turned onto a side street and pulled over on the side of the road, looked back at me over his headrest and asked if I would make him happy too. I said, "What?" Mostly because I couldn't even believe what was happening. He asked me again, "Do you want to make me happy tonight?" I took a second to think through my options. I was alone with this guy who was behind the wheel. This street was dark, and I didn't see any lights on at nearby houses. Close to 1 a.m. at this point on a weeknight, and I didn't know what the hell this guy had in the car. I defaulted to the response many women know to be the true barrier to a men's advances. I don't think my boyfriend would like that very much. His weird grin fell away from his face and he said, "He doesn't have to find out. Come on, make me happy. I know a few ways you can start." I told him my boyfriend was expecting me home any minute. And besides, I love him. I don't want to hurt him. Can you please just take me home? I carried a small knife and a little canister of mace, but all I could think of was to appeal to this guy's sensitive side. Somehow, it worked, and he didn't say another word after that. He just turned back around and silently drove me home. Weirdly enough, I said, "Thanks," as I got out of the car. Old habits die hard, I guess. And that was that. I went into my house and started crying immediately for some reason as soon as I hugged my partner. He told me I needed to contact Uber immediately and tell them what happened, so that this guy wouldn't try to take advantage of anyone else. I agreed and pulled up the app to file the complaint. However, when I looked at my last ride, the picture in the profile was 100% not the same guy who had driven me home. The car was the same, but not the driver. The guy in the photo was brown, wore a turban, maybe in his early 40s. The guy who drove me home was white and seemed just a bit older than me. Uber never followed up with me and just refunded my money. I did tell the police what had happened because my partner insisted, but they didn't take me seriously since nothing actually happened. I had been worried for a while since the guy knew where I lived, but apparently it was long forgotten. A few years back, when I was 17 years old, I went to a party. Everything was all right until the host started getting really intense and creepy. By that point, it was around 3 a.m., and I was pretty drunk. I decided to call an Uber in order to avoid any advances from the insistent guy. The Uber showed up, and I tried to sober up when I got in. The driver started making small talk with me, and in the state I was in, I failed to see the red flags. He started to ask me about the party I was at, and I told him about the creep. Then he told me it was because I was short and cute. He then asked my age, and sensing a weird vibe from him, I told him I was a minor, thinking that would deter any further advances, but it turned out to be a horrible idea. He was driving pretty recklessly on the highway, and I snapped out of my drunken stupor real fast. He then asked me to go get drinks with him that same night, and told me he really liked me. I quickly told him I'd get grounded if I stayed out any later, and that my mother was awake and waiting for me at home. I live in Mexico, and the amount of people, and especially women, that get murdered daily is ridiculously high. When we got to my home address, I noticed the doors were locked, and he kept on insisting on us going to get a drink, even though by now it was almost 4 a.m. I tried to act as nice as possible when I told him I couldn't that night. He then asked for my phone number and told me we could go out the next day. So, not being the first time that some creep had asked me for my number, I gave him my number, but changed the last digit so he couldn't actually contact me. But then he actually dialed the phone as I was getting out of the car. Of course, my phone didn't ring. He started getting agitated and said I gave him the wrong number. I played drunk and stupid and recited my number again, but actually said it correctly in order for him to think he heard the last number wrong. He chuckled and said it was his bad and told me we'd see each other the next day. I made my way into my house and immediately woke my mom up because I was terrified. She managed to calm me down and told me to go to sleep. So I went into my bedroom and started putting my pajamas on when I heard my phone ringing. The Uber driver was trying to video call me. I lost my shit when I saw that on my screen. I immediately denied the call and then noticed he'd sent me about 15 messages asking what time he could pick me up and why I wasn't replying. Of course, I blocked him right away and thought that would be the end of it. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number. I checked the picture and saw it was the driver. He asked me why I'd blocked him and started spamming me. I immediately blocked him. Over the course of the next month, I got messages from random phone numbers, and it quickly became obvious that it was the driver. I would always block him, but eventually I reported him on the Uber app and changed my number. Only problem is, he knows where I live.